In this example, we'll work through the full simplex method with this maximization linear programming problem. So we're going to maximize z equals 2x1 plus 3x2 given these constraints. First, we want to create the simplex tableau, and to do that, we need to add our slack variables and change these two equations. So in this first inequality, 4x1 plus x2 less than or equal to 50, we'll add our slack variable 1 on the left side and change it to an equal sign. Second equation, we'll add our slack variable 2 on the left side and change it to an equal sign. Third equation, we'll add our slack variable 3 and change it to an equal sign. And then we set up our simplex tableau. So this is the coefficients taken from each of those constraint equations, but we do need to add our last row, which is the indicators. The way that we do that is we take the function and we set it equal to 0, so we move x1 and x2 to the other side, to the left side. That would be negative 2x1 minus 3x2 plus z equals 0, because we subtract 2x1 and 3x2 from the left. And then we add that equation as the final row here. So negative 2, negative 3, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0. Now we find our first pivot. To do that, we look for the most negative indicator, which is negative 3. So we're looking now in the x2 column, and we want to check the quotients. So we divide the answer number by the number in the x2 column, and we find the smallest quotient. 50 divided by 1 is 50. 60 divided by 2 is 30. 40 divided by 1 is 40. Since the smallest of those numbers is 30, we choose this as our pivot. So our goal, and we're going to do this in one step, or in rewriting the matrix only one time, is to turn that pivot number 2 into a 1 and turn all other entries in that column, or in the pivot column, to zeros. So we can do that column by column, or row by row. So let's start with this first row. Since the 2 is what we want to turn into as a 1, that means that this 1 needs to be turned into a 0. So let's call this row 1, row 2, row 3, and row 4. And we're going to change this matrix now. So if we want to change that 1 into a 0, we're going to combine row 1 with row 2 somehow. So let's do row 1 minus, or 2 row 1 minus row 2 would give us a 0 in that spot. So 2 row 1 for this first spot would be 2 times 4 minus 1 would be 7. 2 times 1 minus 2 would be 0. 2 times 1 minus 0 would be 2. 2 times 0 minus 1 would be negative 1. 2 times 0 minus 0 is 0. 2 times 0 minus 0 is 0. 2 times 50 minus 60 is 40, because that's 100 minus 60, so 40. And that's our new first row, which we replaced with 2 row 1 minus row 2. Okay, now let's replace row 2, and we want to change the 2 into a 1, which we could do just by dividing row 2 by 2, or taking row half of row, or 1/2 of row 2. 1/2 of 1 is equal to 1/2. 1/2 of 2 is equal to 1. 1/2 of 0 is equal to 0. 1/2 of 1 is 1/2. 1/2 of 0 is 0. 1/2 of 0 is 0. 1/2 of 60 is 30. So that's our new row 2. Now let's take row 3. And now we want to turn this entry, which is a 1, into a 0 by combining row 3 somehow with row 2. Let's do 2 times row 3 minus row 2, because that way we can combine this 1 with this 2 and turn that 1 into a 0. But we go entry by entry, so 2 times row 3 here would be 2 times 1 minus 1 is 1. 2 times 1 minus 2 is 0. 2 times 0 minus 0 is 0. 2 times 0 minus 1 is negative 1. 2 times 1 minus 0 is 2. 2 times 0 minus 0 is 0. 2 times 40 minus 60 is 80 minus 60, which is 20. So that's our new third row. And we continue. Now we work on row 4, and we want to change this negative 3 into a 0 by combining row 4 and row 3. So since we have negative 3 and we're trying to combine it with 2, the least common multiple of those is 6. So we want to multiply row 4 by 2 to get negative 6, and row 2 by 3. So 2 row 4 plus 3 row 2. That would be 2 times negative 2 plus 3 times 1, so that's negative 1. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, plus 3 times 2 is 6, so we get 0. 2 times 0 plus 3 times 0 is 0. 2 times 0 plus 3 times 1 is 3. 2 times 0 plus 3 times 0 is 0. 2 times 1 plus 3 times 0 is 2. 2 times 0 plus 3 times 60 is 180. So this is the next iteration of our simplex tableau. And if you check the x2 column, let's relabel the columns. We have the situation we want of a 1 in the spot that we chose as the pivot spot. So here we have a 1 and we have zeros elsewhere in the column. Okay, let's rename the rows. So this is now row 1, row 2, row 3, and row 4. Now we want to look for a new pivot point. So we look for a negative indicator or a negative number in the bottom row. Here we have a negative indicator of negative 1. And now we look at the quotients in that pivot column. So the quotients would be 40 over 7, 30 over 1/2, 20 over 1. 40 over 7 is approximately 5.7. 30 divided by 1/2 is 60. 20 divided by 1 is 20. The least of these is 5.7, so that means our pivot is the 7 in this column. I'm going to cross out the old labeling just so we don't get confused. Because now our labels are here. Okay, so we want to change all of the entries so that we have a 1 in that pivot spot where the 7 is, and we have zeros elsewhere in this column. So we can multiply row 1 by 1/7 or divide row 1 by 7. That would give us 1, 0, 2 over 7, negative 1 over 7, 0, 0, 40 over 7. And then we want to combine row 2 with row 1 and replace row 2. So let's do row 2 times 14 minus row 1, because that's how we can get rid of the 1/2 using the 7. So 14 times 1/2 is 7, minus 7 is 0. 14 times 1 minus 0 is 14. 14 times 0 minus 2 is negative 2. 14 times 1/2 is 7, minus negative 1 is 8. 14 times 0 minus 0 is 0. 14 times 0 minus 0 is 0. 14 times 30 minus 40 is 380. Now row 3, we want to turn this 1 into a 0 and combine it with the 7. So to do that, we'll do 7 times row 3 minus row 1. That would give us a 0 here. 7 times 1 minus 7. 7 times 0 minus 0 is 0. 7 times 0 minus 2 is negative 2. 7 times negative 1 is negative 7, minus negative 1 is negative 6. 7 times 2 is 14, minus 0. 7 times 0 minus 0 is 0. 7 times 20 is 140, minus 40 is 100. Okay, last we want to change this negative 1 to a 0. We can do that by doing 7 times row 4 plus row 1. That would be 7 times negative 1 is negative 7, plus 7 is 0. 7 times 0 plus 0 is 0. 7 times 0 plus 2 is 2. 7 times 3 plus negative 1 is 21, plus negative 1 is 20. 7 times 0 plus 0 is 0. 7 times 2 plus 0 is 14. And 7 times 180 plus 40 is 1300. So here's the next iteration of our simplex tableau. Since we have no negative indicators, that means that we're almost done. A couple things to note: since the S1 and the S2 column do not look like the identity matrix, that means that those are non-basic. So that's going to tell us that S1 and S2 are 0. Okay, we can also get our basic variables now. So from this first row, since we know that these two variables are both 0, we have that x1 is equal to 40 over 7. From this second row, since these two are equal to 0, we know that 14x2 is equal to 380, or that x2 is equal to 380 over 14. From the third row, we know that 14s3 is equal to 100, or that s3 is equal to 100 over 14. And from the last row, those are both 0, we know that 14z is equal to 1300, so z is equal to 1300 over 14. Approximate values for each of those are given here. Z is approximately 92.86, so that is the maximum value of z in this situation.